Because the subways in Toronto didn't run early enough in the morning, Jim Baroshan had no choice but to ride his bicycle to work. His wife, Babita, was not pleased. In Canada, it is dark in November, and you don't even have a light, she'd said when he was getting dressed to leave. She was right, of course, but what else could he do? They needed to buy diapers for the twins, and the rent on their one-bedroom apartment was due in a week. I promise that I'll be careful, he told her as he was rushing out the door, but she'd refused to kiss him goodbye. In 7 years of marriage, she'd never done that before. A week earlier, the weather had turned from breezy fall temperatures to freezing cold. Yesterday, there'd even been a heavy early snowfall that had blanketed the city and closed the airport. Last winter, when he felt this kind of chill for the first time, Roshan had rushed out to the Variety Village at the nearby plaza and bought a used ski jacket. It wasn't warm enough, and now he wore as many layers underneath it as he could. He didn't have gloves, and as he began his 30-minute ride, his hands stiffened on the icy bicycle handlebars. He pedaled hard. This would get his heart rate up and the blood flowing to his fingers. He'd bought the bicycle at a yard sale for $20. The man wanted $30, stripped it down and rebuilt it from the ball bearings up. Roshan liked to joke with his Somali friends that it was the only engineering work he'd done since coming to Canada. It was quiet on the streets of the public housing complex where they lived, but once he got to the main road, the traffic picked up. This was the most treacherous part of his route, with noisy transport trucks whizzing past, leaving little space for a man on a bicycle, the acrid smell of their exhaust filling his nostrils. There were streetlights, but they were wide apart. He kept riding from light to dark and back into the light, the white steam of his breath appearing and disappearing in front of his face like some kind of magic act at the circus. Since his jacket was black, Babita had used her sewing machine to make him a special white t-shirt with reflecting tape sewn onto it. She insisted that he wear it on top of his jacket to make himself more visible, but in his haste this morning and after their fight, he'd forgotten it. She would be angry with him about that when he got home.
Hello, good evening to Toronto. My name is Catherine. I live in Ulm, Germany, and I'm a big fan of the Ari Green series. My favorite book so far is Stranglehold, and now I'm really looking forward to reading Downfall. So let's start with the short part of it. Alison adored her grandfather from the moment they met at the airport, the day she arrived in Canada with her father. She soon nicknamed him Grandpa Y. His wife had died a few years earlier, and Ari was their only child. Ari's surprise discovery of Alison, his unknown daughter in England, meant that for the first time in his life, Grandpa Y had a grandchild. She couldn't even begin to imagine the horrors he'd been through in his long life. He'd grown up in a small town in central Poland. Half of the 4,000 people who lived there were Catholic, the other half were Jewish. The two groups got along without incident for centuries, until the night in September 1942, when the Nazis arrived. Grandpa Y's first wife and 2 children were murdered, along with all the other 2,000 Jews. Only Yitzhak and 1 other man survived. In 1945, when the American 82nd Airborne liberated the concentration camp he was in, he weighed 85 pounds. After 3 years in a displaced persons camp in Austria, where he met Ari's mother, they arrived in Canada virtually penniless. Despite all this, Grandpa Y was the most positive and wisest person she'd ever met. And then they had a discussion that ends with, she had one more question, the toughest one. Grandpa Y was still holding her hand. The answer is yes, he said before she could speak. Your father loved your mother. I know she loved him. You never have to worry about that. She hadn't cried since her mother died. Now she couldn't stop. Grandpa Y waited patiently. Her parents loved each other. She was conceived in love. She wasn't sure why it meant so much to her, but it did. She got up and bent over to kiss his cheek. He pulled her close for another one of his hugs. This one was tighter than ever. The Nazis took them all away from me, he whispered, his lips close to her ear. Then God gave me you. To me personally, Yitzhak is a really fascinating character. His story is very touching to me, and it's only one example for the cruelties that happen to so many Jewish people. I love how he is described as a positive person you simply have to adore. Thank you.
The night air was cold, the wind coming up from the valley below. Allison started to shake. Burns jumped down and put his arm around her. I didn't expect to see so many women there tonight, Allison said.
36% of the homeless are women. Do you have any idea how many homeless people there are out in the cold in this city every night? She shook her head. Even though he had his arm around her, she was still shivering. Take a guess.
She held her hands up. A few thousand?
Estimates go from 7,500 to 10,000. The average lifespan for people in this city is 82 years. Want to guess what it is for homeless people?
Not really.
Half. Think of 10,000 people dying on average at age 41. He turned and looked at the shimmering view before them. All those cranes throwing up condos for the rich, and so many people without any home at all.
This hurts you, doesn't it? She
What?
said.
What?
Seeing people suffer and dying so young. Allison wasn't quite sure how what happened between them next had happened, but she let her head drop onto his shoulder and her lips lightly touched his neck. He held her closer. What little noise there was from the traffic below seemed to disappear. And then they kissed.
That's all the sex
And
you
that's
get in a
the
word book. That's it.
Cheers, everybody. Yay,
Bobby,
Bobby
we'd have been
Rotenberg.
prepared to do more, but that wasn't in the script.
I asked him for a sex part to read, but I only
caught.
got a kiss.
Exactly. Anyway,
Cheers.
Good luck, Bobby.
Good luck,
You're the
Bobby.
best.
Hello everybody, I'm City Councillor Paula Fletcher. I'm so happy tonight to be here for the launch of Bobby's latest book, Downfall. This guy is so amazing. He is a quintessential Riverdale resident. He has a feel for the city like very few others do. I really have to tell you about a time he came to Eastminster Church when former Mayor Rob Ford was going to cut all the libraries, and he stood there in front of hundreds of people and said, we can't do that. Reading is so important. The city is so important. Our communities are so important. And I really am so grateful for that and all of the wonderful books that he's written. He captures the essence of our city. He's always on point. He's always on trend, the latest trend, as this new novel, Downfall, will show you. And tonight, I'm very honored to read a short passage to you from this book. Although Toronto lies on the shores of Lake Ontario, during the city's post-war building boom, civic politicians did everything they could to ignore the waterfront and keep it from the view of the local populace. The most egregious example of this was the Gardiner Expressway, named after Frederick C. Gardiner, a highways-obsessed 1950s alderman. The Gardiner, as it came to be known, is a mammoth raised highway that for decades has acted as a barrier to the lake. The nadir of this ignore the waterfront trend came in the late 1990s, when fly-by-night builders threw up a pair of Stalin-era-like concrete condominiums on the narrow strip of land between the Gardiner and the lake. This happened in the year when there was a gradual awakening to the notion that cities did not have to be only about cars. At the same time, the 1950s highways started to crumble. Since then, seemingly endless debates have raged about the raised road, an eyesore to most downtowners, a transit line for most suburbanites. Ideas were passed around ranging from burying the damn thing to ripping it out to simply leaving it alone. In the end, a small part was torn down, most of it stayed, and massive development has sprung up on both sides. Glass towers and a regenerating waterfront with widened sidewalks, outdoor cafes, and extensive bike and jogging paths.
Robert Rotenberg, Downfall. Hi, my name's John Ota, and I really like this book. And what I like about this book is that I'm reading, and all of a sudden I find these little tidbits that I don't expect. Like walking into an autopsy. After having to notify the loved ones of a murder victim that their family member had been killed, attending the autopsy was the second toughest thing for a homicide detective to do. Back so soon, Dr. Ramos, the pathologist, said, greeting Kennicott. She was a stylish, agile woman with long, thin fingers. She had the look of someone who in another life could have been a concert pianist. Thank you for coming in on such short notice, he said. I appreciate that this is urgent. Another homeless person from the same location is what I understand, she said in her lovely accent. A woman this time, Kennicott said. We've had Adam, now we have Eve. Both from the Humber Valley, hardly the Garden of Eden. Let's have a look, shall we? She said as casually as a dentist about to examine a sore tooth. Kennicott watched as she opened up the body efficiently, cut away and scooped out the key organs, all the while narrating her actions into a small mic clipped to the top of her white coat. An assistant followed her every move, anticipating the tools she would need and preparing the appropriate jar or steel plate with which to take and store the various body parts. In less than an hour she was done, pulling off her surgical gloves, using her elbows to turn on the long stem taps over the deep sink in the corner of the room, and washing her hands. Cause of death is easy, she said to Kennicott as she scrubbed away. Smack on the top of the head with a glass bottle. Lots of fragments in her hair and scalp, and the head bashed hard in the back. Robert Rotenberg, Downfall.
My name is Pat, and I want to get in my 2 cents worth following the release of Bobby Rotenberg's latest novel, Downfall, and to also express the pleasure I've derived from reading all of Robert's previous novels. When I fell in love with the characters, who Robert made me feel are real and relatable, the storyline could only be developed inside the head of someone who knows the intricate details of policing, court procedure, backroom deals, and might I say, a good love story. Robert's books are page-turners, and as with all good novels, especially mystery, you don't know until the end who done it. If I were to choose one of Robert's earlier books that jumps out at me, it seems to be Stray Bullets. This is likely because Robert had the guts to write a grim tale involving a child and a shooting at a downtown Tim Hortons. Not wanting to give away any of the plot, I've chosen to read a short excerpt. When Detective Kennicott, and again when Ari Green, get word of the shooting, I felt I was there in that parking lot. All available officers in Quadrant D. Sound of gunshots in the area of Elm Street and University Avenue, at or near the Tim Hortons on Elm. It was a hot shot, an extra loud emergency call that blasted through Officer Daniel Kennicott's police radio, overriding everything else. It meant a major crime was in progress. Drop everything and go. Kennicott started running full out. He unclipped the radio from his hip. PC Kennicott, badge 8064, D-post, he shouted, corner of University and Armory, heading north, about 30 seconds away. You'll be the first officer on scene, the dispatcher said. Be careful. Child hit by bullet, the dispatcher said. Her dispassionate voice was a strange counterpoint to the terrible news. One suspect seen fleeing on foot, backup and ambulance on the way. Kennicott got to Elm Street and cut to his left. Almost there, he said. In his 4 years on the force, he had got 2 other hot shots. Both had been relatively static domestic situations. A wife stabbed to death in a bathtub, a husband dead on his kitchen floor. But this was gunplay right in the middle of the city, people all around, the shooters on the loose. And then we go from there to when Ari Green got the news. Homicide detectives often bragged about how they always walked, never ran. But despite the slippery sidewalks that had turned to sheer ice as the temperature dropped, he ran. Across the plaza in front of the new city hall, under the arch at the side of the High Court, where this case was sure to end up, through the rush hour traffic on University Avenue and down Elm Street to the Tim Hortons. 3 squad cars were there already. Green flashed his badge at the officers with the police tape. "String it wider, much wider. I want an outer perimeter," he said. "Cover the whole street and buildings on both sides. I want everyone and everything moved back. Police cruisers, TV trucks, now." "Yes, sir," both the cops said in unison. I recall when I read this for the first time, because if you're from Toronto, and of course Robert, or Bobby, whichever you choose to call him, he writes so vividly about our hometown that you just feel yourself running up University and along Elm along with them. So settle in for a very, very good read with Downfall, but if you haven't read the first 5 Rotenberg novels, read them in order. The characters become part of your fictional family, and you don't want to miss any of their storylines. Be prepared to fall in love with Ari Green's father, Grandpa Y, who lost his first wife and 2 children in concentration camps, but lives now with humor, wisdom, love, and grace. All the best to Bobby and to everyone who has the pleasure of reading these novels.